It's 1:38 a.m. Time for October Pod. Hello, this is Edward October, and I'm here with a very special guest, the lovely and talented Dr. Elsa October. This is Mrs. October. Today we're here to do something a little bit out of the ordinary for October Pod. This is our first unscripted podcast, and today we're going to forego telling a scary story for film analysis.
Today we're going to be talking about the topic of adoption horror. Not that this is necessarily a subgenre. Edward, we should start with a little bit of a disclaimer about this topic, because this episode is not a commentary on adoption itself.
Correct. We're not really going to talk about the state of adoption as a social issue. We're going to talk about it as a theme or as a trope in one of our favorite horror films. Well, it's certainly one of mine. I don't know about you.
Oh, we're just talking about one?
No, we're just going to do Omen 2 today. So I'm an adoptee, and the fact that I'm doing a show about adoption in horror film probably makes it sound as though I had a horrible childhood and that adoption was a terrible thing for me. But it's not. I had a happy childhood in spite of the YouTube channel and podcast that I run. Being an adopted kid, can be tough for some. It wasn't so tough for me, but it has its weirdnesses about it. And I've noticed that a lot of that weirdness gets addressed like so many other crazy things in people's lives through horror film.
I guess my personal connection to this is I am married to you and we have a family together. And I think when you're raising a family, some of your own experiences through childhood kind of echo sometimes. And also, I'm just a huge film buff. And I just think this is a really interesting topic for us to start with.
Also, you are not a doctor of medicine.
No. I'm a doctor of Spanish literature and cultural studies. And one of my interests is film, particularly late 20th century, early 21st century Latin American film. So, should we just dive right into the film we're covering today?
The full title is Damien, The Omen 2. The first time I saw this film, it's kind of funny. So my mother, and I'm adopted, when I was about 11 years old and really getting into Hammer films and other horror films, was like, if you like scary movies, you got to watch The Omen. It's like super scary. And so I watched The Omen and it scared the hell out of me. And it's this sort of like parable about how the evils of adoption. So it scared me to death, but I immediately wanted to get my hands on all the Omen that I could. So I watched The Omen and Omen 3 in the same weekend because those were the only two that I could find at my local video store. So I absorbed Omen and Omen 3 in the same weekend and didn't sleep. I had that Jerry Goldsmith score stuck in my head, and so I'd go to bed and just hear these like satanic choirs in my head. And then I want to say like a year or two later, I finally got my hands on Damien, Omen 2.
So you were the same age as Damien in the film when you watched the film. You were 13, 14, right?
Yeah, it's probably about 12, 13. Holy shit, I hadn't made that connection. So, should I give you a synopsis? Spoiler alert. So if you haven't seen Damien, The Omen 2, you really need to reevaluate all of your decisions in life. But no, pause this. Just pause it. Don't turn it off. Go out. Get it on Prime. Get it on wherever you get your movies. And you should be able to get it pretty cheaply to rent if you don't already have it in your library. And take a look at it. It's very underrated for the series, I think. A lot of people don't give it the credit that it's due. The Omen 2 takes place. Really, it begins like, I think, a week after the final shot of the original Omen. So The Omen concerns the birth of the Antichrist, this little kid named Damien Thorn. He was adopted by an American diplomat, and in the events of the first movie, his adopted parents are killed.
Yes, this movie's from 1978, the year you were born. When you're 13, yeah, so that would have been the same age as the characters. Yeah. The thing about how Damien Thorne comes to his family, comes to his adoptive parents, is kind of related to one of the tropes that we're going to talk about for context. His mother is pregnant. They're American diplomats in Rome.
His adopted mother is pregnant. Yeah,
Yes,
his adoptive
sorry. His adoptive mom is in labor, and she is giving birth in a very kind of old school traditional Catholic hospital. The adoptive dad doesn't get to go into the labor room with the woman when she's giving birth. And so it starts with this scene of the sisters working at the hospital, the nuns, bringing out a stillborn.
Yeah, so basically, there's a priest who speaks to Robert Thorne. Father Spoleto talks to Robert Thorne, tells him, hey, your son died in childbirth. But as it so happens, another child was born the exact same moment in this hospital. And he even resembles you a little bit. Why don't you just take him and raise him as your own? And, God would not mind this little deception. By the way, this is on June 6th at 6 a.m. All this birthing happening.
And the
666.
year is 19.
No, it's not the year. The month, the day, and the hour. Which just adds up to bullshit because it's time zones and everything.
We have this deception. The adoptive mother is never told her child that she was carrying in the womb was born stillborn. The husband never tells her anything. And so it kind
to
of
the
starts
point that she begins to go crazy about it.
She does. And so there's this kind of, I would say, this argument that's kind of calling into question or maybe shedding some light on patriarchy in a sense. Robert Thorne represents the powerful male, and he's controlling his wife's life and her experiences. He goes and takes this child that is not theirs without consulting her, without telling her, lying to her, leading her to believe that this other baby is her own, that she carried in the womb. And her instincts are like, no, this isn't right. This doesn't feel right. But he insists, no, this is our baby. This is the one you carried. And it does. She begins to think, yeah, she's losing it. That she's losing her mind. So there's this interesting play in the film.
Of course, spoiler alert, the kid that they adopted was born of a jackal and is like the devil's son.
Or at least that's, what some believe in the film.
That's the bill of goods they're selling us.
There's another interpretation of the film, which is just that it's possible that the adoptive parents are just, losing their minds or losing their rationality. And they're kind of projecting all this evil onto this child that they adopted. There's an ambivalence to the original film there and to the characterization of Damien. Is he really, the Antichrist, or is he just a normal little kid? The wife is thrown into this situation. And it kind of brings up one of the tropes we're going to talk about today, which is the unwitting adoptive parent, or the unknowing, the crazy. We'll put crazy in quotes because we're not trying to make any commentary on, people's mental health or anything. There's a very patriarchal message here, but so women who can't get pregnant are lesser than, they're damaged goods, they're defective in some way. Women who can't carry a baby to term are defective. They are characterized by the ends of the films. Another
thing from the first film is that there was this prophecy that the adoptive mother was going to have a second child, which would be a child of her own. And there's a big subplot about Damien making sure that child was not born. That's why she gets thrown out of the window when she's in the hospital because she's pregnant.
Let's go to the Omen 2. So Omen 2, we have another adoptive mother who is the stepmom. She's the stepmom to the two boys. So she's the stepmother to Damien, who's been adopted again. So this is his second adoption.
At the end of the first film, Damien, which is the kid's name, Antichrist kid, both of his adoptive parents are killed. So in the second film, you see that he's been adopted by his uncle, who is super rich owner of the Thorne Industries, this big multinational corporation, played by William Holden, and his wife, Anne, played by Lee Grant. Damien in this film is played by Jonathan Scott Taylor, and he's also raised alongside his cousin Mark, played by Lucas Donat. So he's being raised with his cousin by his uncle, and his cousin's stepmother. And from there, he goes on to a military academy with his cousin. And at the military academy, he runs into a drill sergeant or a platoon leader, played by Lance Henriksen, who it turns out is a Satanist who's out there to look after the interests of sweet, sweet baby Satan, Damien.
I guess going back to the crazy adoptive parent, like really the person who aids and abets Damien as much as possible throughout the film is the stepmother, Anne Thorne, who we know is Richard Thorne's second wife, not Mark's biological mother either. There's some commentary in the film, from other members of the family that, none of the children are hers. And so you kind of see this repetition of this idea of women's worth is tied to their ability to, continue the seed of the family. So the relationship between Damien and Anne at times seems to border on some sort of Oedipal themes. There's a shift in the middle of the film where she kind of starts to favor Damien quite a bit. And we later learn that she suffers consequences for it.
I think we should talk about the Aunt Marion scenes. So at the beginning of the film, you see the boys, they're at the Thorne estate, I suppose, outside Chicago, and they're getting ready to go to military school. And their crazy Aunt Marion is there for, I guess, the weekend. And she hates Damien. She's very suspicious of Damien and his motives. Doesn't like him. There's a big scene at the dinner table where she threatens to sell off all of her shares of the Thorne industry that she has, making lots of big, like crazy soap opera diva kind of threats. But there's a scene, the boys are leaving for military school, for the military academy, and Damien is walking through the room and is like, "Oh, Aunt Marion, I didn't know you were here in the room. Goodbye, Aunt Marion. I'll see you later." Just being like a sweet kid. And Marion's like, "Who told you to say that? Who did somebody tell you to come and say bye to me? Ugh, you would never think of to say goodbye to me on your own." Yeah. More or less.
That's a really interesting interpretation.
Is it?
I don't, it's just the particular actress doesn't actually go, meh.
She doesn't say the word meh, but she is meh incarnate, I would say, this lady. So anyway, she bitches out Damien for being thoughtless. Well, so you cut away to Mark, the cousin, running into, I forget if it's his dad or his stepmom.
Stepmom.
She says, "Have you said bye to Aunt Marion yet?" And he's like, "Oh God, do I have to? Oh my God, she's the worst." And so he goes and says bye to her, and Aunt Marion's like, "Oh, Mark, my precious, this widow," and just adores him. So the evil child gets blamed for being a dick when he wasn't, and the natural, true child is greeted with open arms and all this stuff.
That also seems to be part of the conflict within the family, this internal conflict, where some family members are a little suspicious of Damien's origins. And again, his adoptive father, Robert Thorne, lied to everyone and never told anyone,
Right.
what was going on. And the family has been in the tabloids to some extent. Much to the shame and chagrin, I guess, of the family, because wealthy, powerful, And Richard is pretty, he doesn't really fall for most of these tabloid stories. Oh, it's all tabloids.
Did he talk about the news that much? He doesn't like journalists. He doesn't like to talk to journalists.
He doesn't like journalists. He doesn't believe what was in the papers about his brother.
Which there's an interpretation to be made that his brother, went crazy and tried to kill his son.
Right. That is really what Richard believes. Like, it's just such a tragedy. Those two parents, my poor brother just had a mental breakdown and did something really tragic and heinous. But his perspective shifts over time throughout the movie. So it's really like this pull between the point of view of Aunt Marion, who believes Mark is the golden child and Damien is evil, and Anne, his wife, who thinks that's a crazy theory and Damien's just a normal kid. Although we find out she's secretly been
Crazy.
Satanist who's aiding and abetting him because she believes he's the Antichrist. Whatever.
I may be jumping ahead a bit, but like her relationship with Damien is very nurturing, and like she's very loving towards Damien and wholesome. Like she comes off as like a very wholesome lady. Damien's first adoptive mother, was like very frigid and chilly and kept him at a distance. Anyway, it says something interesting. If you take the interpretation that Damien was just a regular kid and Lee Grant's character was just this, loving stepmom trying to do right by her nephew, there's a real commentary to be made because her character keeps repeatedly being compared to the Whore of Babylon. And her ultimate fate is very Whore of Babylon-like.
So, well, she meets the same fate.
She meets the same fate
As the Whore of Babylon.
And so if you want to make a commentary about these childless women, which again, she's a stepmother, she's not even Mark's mom. There's some things that could be said about that in way of commentary.
Yeah, this is a trope that we've talked about before, but in some other films it gets this idea of the adoptive mother as being defective, less than a whole woman, whatever you want to say. That gets subverted in The Orphanage, El Orfanato, which we're going to talk about
some
later.
Other time.
Yeah, later in the series. It's something that you see throughout the Omen films, right? Throughout in Omen 1 and Omen 2.
I'm sorry, which is especially fucked up because in the case of Damien, it's like your adoptive mothers are crazy, but your birth mother's a jackal.
Damien learns this.
Yeah, he learns this. He talks to his Satanist peeps. Lance Henriksen says, read the book of Revelation. It's like totes magotes all about you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And he goes and does some really intuitive barbering on himself. Some really agile mirror placement, and finds that 666 birthmark on his scalp. And then he just runs and runs and runs until like he runs out of stuff to run onto and goes to the water and is like, why me?
Then when we next meet Damien, he just seems to kind of have accepted it. He's accepted his fate, which is an interesting, evolution of this character. It seems, and my interpretation of this is that we have this idea of this adoptee who's experienced a lot of lack of acceptance and shitty parenting maybe, and is just trying really so hard to be what people are telling him to be. So, okay, so I'm the Antichrist? Well, so be it. This is what the adults in my life who I look up to and I love are telling me, so I'm just going to be it.
My Bible-thumping Aunt Marion hates me and is shitty to me. Basically everybody that quotes scripture in this movie tries to kill me. But these Satanists, we can hang.
Well, I think there's a desire to be loved, validated. I think this is kind of one of the motivations of the character. But then some of the actions he takes in the film really don't jive with this interpretation, I think, or this motivation, right?
Hi, this is Edward October for OctoberPodVHS.com, here to tell you what people are saying about our true crime podcast. A thread store in Arizona says, too much dribble and slang. These ladies obviously enjoy their own humor and sound high. Hey, at least they called you ladies. Benny from Idaho says, your topics are so appealing, but a 3-person pod is difficult enough to follow without banter? Our true crime podcast only has 2 people? Wait. Where's the other 100 5-star reviews? Can somebody give me the 5-star reviews? Okay, here we go. Much better. Luscious Lee says, stand up. 5 stars. You girls are funny AF. I especially love the me and Mrs. Jones rendition you sneak into the recording. Cherry G107 says, I struggle finding a new podcast, and so far, I've been hooked to you guys' podcast. Keep up the good work. Thumbs up, smiley face. Our true crime podcast, 2 girls, 1 story, and lots of bad renditions of songs you love. Available on your favorite podcatcher. Go binge it today.
This brings us to this other idea of the orphan character as a vehicle for social commentary. Some sort of commentary on where society is, where it's failing its children. So, do you want to maybe talk about social commentary and how that connects to Damien's access to wealth and power in this film?
He's born into a wealthy family. He's born into a political family. His adopted father, Robert Thorne, Gregory Peck in the first movie, his best friend is the President of the United States. And at the end of the first film, Damien is at their funeral holding the president's hand. It's a political deal, and he inherits wealth. So the sort of prophecy mythos behind the Omen films is that, comes from the book of Revelation, and prophecy is like through peace he will wage war to end all wars, or I forget the exact quote. From the eternal sea he rises, which they interpret as the world of politics in the first one. I think that's a pretty loosey-goosey interpretation of Revelation. I think the first Omen would have come out right after Watergate. So I imagine that they would be very keen on the political commentary. And so, yeah, there's this whole, I don't want to keep using the word trope, but there's this whole, trope of Damien slowly acquiring power and wealth by, killing or the mysterious Satan forces around him, killing off his family, making way for him to inherit everything and gather all of the power to him so that, he can, I think his career path is eventually to become, president of the United States and, really get his Satan on.
To kind of bring us back to a character we'd mentioned earlier, we'd mentioned Aunt Marion is one of the largest shareholders in the family's company. One of the industries they're working in is in experimenting with pesticides
And
seeds.
genetic modification.
Genetic
and
modification.
agricultural.
Right, and basically agricultural industrial technology. That is this kind of field that Damien becomes interested in.
Feed the world.
Feed the world, yes. Richard Thorne, against his better instincts, starts giving more and more power over to an underling in the company named Paul. And Paul's big idea for getting rich, for making Thorne Industries super, super, super rich, is through famine. So his idea is to, famine is what we're going to make our money off of. It's an interesting idea because here we're extending beyond the world of politics and kind of going into industrial technology. I think the idea of wealth and power are kind of consolidating with Damien. So he has that political side from the first film, and then you have the wealth being consolidated in the second film.
It's kind of all the same thing. These days, corporations wield, but not my political britches. Corporations, especially in America, do have a tremendous influence on politics. Don't kid yourself. It's sort of like Damien's building up the perfect storm. He's got the political connects shored up. He's got the wealth shored up. He's gonna be the controlling interest in Thorne Industries. And so we have this up-and-coming young whippersnapper executive, Paul Buell, I think his last name is, who's going to do this really wildly controversial, let's engineer famine. Let's profit off of famine. He's one of the Satanists that are sort of shepherding Damien's life and career along behind the scenes. Gets up to some really unethical shit. And in the background, you hear, him having conversations about, there are these native leaders who don't want to sell their land to the Thorne Industry, and they were just murdered. Oh dear, I hope we don't have any over-enthusiastic men in the field. And then on top of that, they're dealing with all these gnarly chemicals too, which the catalyst to one of the big scare scenes in the movie is when the chemical plant poisons all those people. And that subplot kind of goes nowhere. Before we watched it, I was getting ready to sink my teeth into the corporate horrors that it presents. And that kind of goes nowhere. I think the Paul character, we see him give a knowing glance to Damien after shit goes down at the chemical plant. That's the last we see of him or hear of it.
That's true. Although the two big scares, or not the biggest.
If it was a slasher movie, it would be kills.
Two of the biggest kills are related to technology or the misuse of technology and like new technology. So here I'm referring to the chemical weapons used in the factory, the pesticides that are unleashed. One of the engineers who has some ethics and wants to stop this character Paul from using famine as a tool to get rich is poisoned.
Well, no, that's Yossarian, and he's not against Paul so much as Bill Atherton was.
Right, but Rosarian is the one who shared with Richard information about
Oh, that's true. He knew
local
too
leaders.
much.
He knew too much. He shared information about local leaders being killed in the field. He's supportive to a point, and then he's like, I'm not sure I want to do this anymore. And then he gets killed. One of the other big scares is related to DNA testing. The boys at Damien and Mark's school are in the chemical plant. This is how Damien makes it work. He asks Paul from his uncle's company if they can have a field trip to the plant. And while they're having the field trip, the pesticides get released, accidentally, air quotes,
Accidentally by Satan.
by Satan's child or the Antichrist or whatever.
No, I don't think it was Damien that did it. I think it was the devil that did it.
Oh, really? I thought it was Damien.
It's really ambiguous if like the devil stuff happens because of Damien's like evil Jedi 666 powers, or if it's like the devil watching over him.
There's some play here with Paul, and you're not really sure what his role is. He plays a little bit of a father figure to Damien, and he's kind of watching, observing when all this. So it's like, is it mentor? Yeah. Is it Damien who did this? Is it Satan himself or the forces of evil? Paul, did he have a role in it? And if you're thinking, going back to our original commentary about how Damien is just this kid who's looking for validation, if that's the case, and if Paul made the accident happen but made Damien feel like it was his mystical father, Satan, doing it for him, this kind of sets the kid up. But anyway, so that's another interpretation.
We are now legally obligated to mention that the doctor that examines them is designing women is Meshach Taylor.
Yes. And so another good reason to see the movie. So Meshach Taylor is the doctor. He examines the boys at the hospital. All the boys are taken to the hospital to get checked out, of course. Everyone is sick, except for Damien. He's just fine. And Richard Thorne is like, that's odd. Some of the people who have reached out to him, a journalist who tells him that, your adopted nephew is the Antichrist. He dismisses their ideas, but little things happen, accidents happen, that just all kind of seem to add up to him, to a pattern. So he says, you know what, why don't we let both boys, both Mark and Damien, stay in the hospital? And the doctor, Meshach Taylor, says, I want to run some tests on Damien, because if he's not having a reaction, just like everyone else, that's something that really needs to be checked out. So he, draws his blood, starts doing some genetic testing. He discovers, while testing Damien's blood, that he has part of the DNA of a jackal.
I don't know if he finds that it's DNA of a jackal or if it's just like his blood type. Like he looks at his blood and the blood cells look like jackal blood.
But anyway, so this is, again, technology, science, but science is used for the forces of evil.
Let me tell you about this elevator scene. Forces of Satan. He has known maybe 5 minutes about this jackal blood, and of course finds out he's in the lab by himself at night on like the millionth floor. And he gets in the elevator, and it's this weird, like ultra modern, like glass elevator. And there's a mishap with the elevator, and the elevator goes into free fall. And Meshach Taylor, you see him while he's in free fall, and he's just, like casually walking around, like pushing the button. He would be stuck to the ceiling, but he's like, I'm here, we can hang. So this like amazing, like anti-grav elevator, and miraculously, he's okay after the elevator stops, but then the cable breaks, and the cable comes down and rips him in half by the belly. And if you watch it, like they kind of slow it down, it looks like when the cable hits that there's somebody off screen, like you don't see their hands or anything, but it looks like something like an invisible cable is pulling his lower half away from his upper half, which wouldn't happen. So you get like a great look at the intestine pull. But obviously this was trying to one up the finest beheadings in film history, which is David Warner's death in the first one. They're definitely trying to like, we're gonna get this guy better, but it's not better. So I guess the big theme with this that we haven't really talked about is, like the apocalypse, the end times. All of this is coming from Revelation. The stepmother, Lee Grant's character, she's made up to be this whore of Babylon figure, which is a figure from the book of Revelation. Paul is all about famine, which is like, okay, are you the famine horse? Which of the four horsemen of the apocalypse was famine? And so, the Antichrist coming back and all this stuff. So if there is maybe a social commentary, it is socio-political commentary. It's headed down a bad road. Our governments are corrupt. Our corporations are corrupt and looking to exploit people with their evil science and other stuff. One could maybe make an argument that it's making a statement about the death of the nuclear family or non-traditional families. And, women. Baby makers or crazy makers. Is the way they're seen in the
or
movies.
unable to make baby makers, which is why they need to be killed. Yeah, in a way, when you describe it that way, it seems like this film is the evangelical conservatives' wet dream. It confirms everything they ever suspected. Science is out to get us. Corporations are out to get us. Children who, are born into tragedy can't be trusted. And women who can't make babies can't be trusted. The only good families are nuclear ones.
We can maybe throw xenophobia in here because Damien's an evil Italian baby.
The actor uses an English accent throughout.
I haven't done my research on this kid that plays the Omen in part 2, but he sort of has like this weird like hybrid American British accent, which I think if it's not his natural accent, or even if it is, that's a good choice for the character because, in the first one, he was growing up in England. His dad's the ambassador to Great Britain. That really plays to this character.
So there's xenophobia there. There's globalization is something that the company wants, the Thorn Industries. That's where the evil Paul, who's the mentor to Damien, that's where he wants to take the company. He wants to globalize. Yeah, it's really, if you wanted to see a film that's like, yeah, that proves it. I was right. This film really does it.
Well, I mean, it's hard to make a film based on biblical prophecy and it not kind of come out like that.
But this kind of leads us back to the whole reason we're doing this podcast in the first place, which is why, focus on this adopted child so much and make him, your
boogeyman.
Your fall guy. There's a lot of this other trope of the adopted child as the bad seed or bad blood. So we don't know his background, or it's an unsavory background, and it comes to destroy the family in the end.
And not just destroy the family, but potentially destroy the world. I watch Omen 2, and I really relate to Damien a lot. You don't really relate to Damien in the first one because he's just this weird, annoying kid who doesn't want to go to church and who seems to cause people to die around him. He's not really a character in the first movie, but in the second movie, I think there's much to relate to Damien. He's grown up in this family that he doesn't really feel a part of, and God knows lots of people have had that experience, whether they're adopted or not.
There's certain motivations that are put on him that are not appropriate for his psychological development for someone who would be 13. There seems to be an element of, I think of all of the Omen films, this one really kind of helps you to empathize with Damien because he's kind of been used.
But again, that's kind of like, he's really sympathetic like the first 3/4 of the film. And then he finds out he's the Antichrist and he's like, all right, I'm going to be a dick. I'm going to give my cousin who I love an aneurysm. This woman who's been really nice to me, I'm going to make sure I toast her ass with a gas leak. I mean, spoilers. Jesus.
So I have a question for you,
Okay.
Edward October. What happens to the uncle, to Richard Thorne, played by William Holden? What happens to him?
He gets killed by his wife, right? Lee Grant stabs him. There's like bodies hit the floor towards the end of this. And I'll be honest, after a certain point, you kind of stop caring about which bodies are hitting which floor. And I don't think it's not a big death. Like, it's followed up right with Lee Grant's death, which is spectacular and fiery. But I think he's killed. He's stabbed by the knives of Megiddo, which are, they're like Damien's kryptonite. They're these ancient knives that they're supposed to kill. Made just for Antichrist killing.
Okay, so any final thoughts?
So part of the reason why we're doing this is to identify, it's pretentious to say that there's a subgenre out there that nobody's really looked into, but it's a recurring theme from Frankenstein, the book. There's a huge adoption element in it. Everybody talks about, hero with 1,000 faces and, how hero mythology and like comic book mythology are very like lots of orphans, lots of adoptees, lots of Moses baskets. But the same thing happens in horror film, except it doesn't end up that way. If you think about it, Damien is not all that different from Clark Kent. He's this weird kid with these weird origins, with these gnarly powers and black hair.
And I think he has blue eyes too.
So there's a couple more films that we're gonna look at where we talk about some of this. And I realize that our discussion has been a little bit everywhere. So Jesus Christ, watch the movie before you listen to us ramble about it. We don't have all the answers, but hopefully we're asking the right questions, and maybe we can point out something that's always been in the horror genre that nobody quite talks about.
The fact that this film plays so much, I don't know if plays is the right word, but it dances around so much this idea of adoption and identity, and Damien as an adolescent trying to find his identity, and then he's, so many of these tropes of the bad seed, adopted child with bad blood, the woman who can't have a baby is marginalized and becomes a pariah. This film really covers a lot of the themes or sub-themes that we've seen in adoption horror. I think it was a great one to start off with. And thank you for having me here.
In the lair.
In the lair.
Studio 138, I think is what we've been calling it.
The forest sounded like it was being spread wide open with whatever was coming. I could hear leaves and bark being crushed and trees splitting. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat as my body broke out into a sweat and goose flesh pricked at me like glass shards. I literally fell backward when the creature came into sight. It was the ugliest son of a bitch I'd ever seen. From Point of No Return by Ellie Douglas. Explore the weird worlds of New Zealand author Ellie Douglas. Find Ellie Douglas on Twitter at AuthorEllie or at authorellie.com. That's author, AUTHOR, Ellie, ELLIE.
Hi, my name is Melissa and I'm the host of The Haunted Room, a paranormal and spiritual podcast. Every week I share some of my own personal stories and a few of yours as well. We talk about things from spirits to ghosts, demons, angels, cryptids, or any experience that just seems a little too weird and you honestly can't call it normal. What if you've communicated with a ghost? You feel other people's emotions? Maybe you're questioning if you're an empath, medium, or could even be a psychic. Well, we cover that too. So join me every Monday on your favorite podcast player and tune in as we talk about all the great and sometimes scary things that happen through this haunted journey we call life. Because ghosts are out there. And if you're not careful, they will get you.
You have been listening to Octoberpod. Octoberpod was produced, edited, and directed for Octoberpod home video by Edward October. My special guest today is Dr. Elsa October. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, Podbean, and at octoberpodvhs.com. Octoberpod, retro horror for bold individualists.